Hi all, it's time for the sip at 6. How are you? A lovely day, amazing. Isn't it warm today and yesterday? We're in mid-May, so yeah, not bad. By the luck we live by, we had the sunniest April on record. If you've got a pandemic going on, that's a good thing. Yes. And it's looking pretty good. So you ready for the sip? Tea bag in. Normally I'd say it's got to last, but you have to say, actually, we seem to be coming out the other side of this. So enjoy. Now, why do I say we seem to be coming out the other side of this? After all, the Bank of England said the economy is in meltdown. The stock markets have melted down and they melted up again, and then they're sort of steady on. But it does feel as though we're sort of coming out of this. And so I thought I'd do some of the comments that you've given me on Twitter. And I thought there was sort of quite a few good ones. One guy in America was saying, okay, if you're in a motor vehicle, if you're in a crash in a motor vehicle, your odds of dying are 1 in 100. You can see where I'm going with this. Swimming, going for a bit of a swim out there. 1 in 1100. Seems a bit high. I'm not sure our local swimming baths are in the equation there, but a bee sting. 1 in 53,000 bee stings could go bad on you. Hurricane and tornado, well, we don't get many of those in Hinckley. 1 in 55,000 of death. Now, risk of dying of COVID-19, which, as we know, the virus is called SARS-CoV-2, so it is scary. The risk of dying of that in the next 3 months. So, this is the US, remember, 90,000 deaths as of May 18 in a 328 million US population, about 1 in 5,000. Well, doesn't sound so good actually. But the risk of dying of COVID, if you have no pre-existing risk factors like dark skin, low vitamin D, diabetes, obesity. So 73% of US COVID deaths had these pre-existing factors. So take away 73% of the deaths, 24,000 deaths in a population of 328 million, 1 in 13,333. So, I feel a bit better about that. I mean, I don't want to die in the next 3 months, but that sounds pretty good. And then the risk of dying if you're under the age of 65 and you don't have dark skin, low vitamin D, you're not confined indoors, you're not in a nursing home, and you're not taking immune suppressant drugs or all these sort of other risk factors. So then you have to take away 99% of the deaths. So there's 902 unfortunate people remaining. So that is 1 in 333,333. Yeah, see, Pretty Patel, eat your heart out. I can do long numbers. I mean, I feel pretty good about that, actually. I mean, if I got stung by a bee, that's 1 in 50,000. My chances of dying of COVID in the next 3 months are 1 in 333,333. So that doesn't seem too bad. Then there's the issue of the vaccine. Lots of, okay, I know there's skepticism. Can you actually have a vaccine to a coronavirus? But it seems to me that because it is what it is, the virus that it's sort of come from, SARS-CoV, just burned out. It just disappeared after 3 months. So there's just as a good chance that the virus will burn itself out. So I feel pretty good about this at the moment. I feel, it seems fine. We've sort of learned so much about how to live our lives with this virus. If you sing in a choir and you turn up for a choir practice and 1 out of the 60 people have the virus, well, that's really bad news. I mean, you've got a very good chance that during the course of the evening, because people are making a lot of noise, most of the choir could catch the virus, and of them, 2 could die. So it's clear we're going to have to do things a little differently now to what we were doing before, and gatherings of that nature of 20, 30, 50 people, certainly until there's a vaccine, or certainly until this burns out, are going to be the thing of the past. I mean, even if you put face masks on, is it really worth the risk of standing in a group with 60 people? I don't think so. In an enclosed space. We know it's the enclosed space that makes the difference. Whether it be a cruise ship, an aircraft carrier, a meat packing plant, we know that's the problem. Now, we don't yet know whether a football terrace is going to be an enclosed space. It sort of feels like it. A lot of people shouting, a lot of people. So the chances are some of them will be shedding the virus. So, but we don't have to worry about that till next autumn anyway. A return to football and, cricket, socially distanced, watching cricket. That sounds pretty sensible, masks on, a beer, nice weather. That all sounds pretty normal. So a return to normality for most of us, is really on the cards, because certainly for everyone under 65, that 1 in 333,333, I need a sip of tea after doing that successfully, that's fine. I can live with that. If, you look at people who go and indulge in risk sports, their chances of life-changing injury or death are, far greater than that. So normality, with the addition of the virus, that's been a fact of life in Asia ever since the virus first came along in 2003. And it's just a question of adjustment to that. And it seems, it doesn't really matter what you did. It seems that all countries are ending up in about the same place, that the under 65s are more or less unaffected, and there are deaths in the over 65s. 99% of the deaths in the over 65s. So again, as a thing that should be affecting daily life, it's not really obvious that should be the case. So you can see a path ahead to normality, and even if you are over 65, so for example, most of the people going on a cruise You know, apologies if you're a cruise fan, but most of the people going on a cruise are going to be retired or, you know, within sight of retirement age. And I think, you know, those people, they're not going to be put off going on a cruise just because of the virus. You know, they'll change the way they do things. They won't all eat from the buffet. It won't be quite as social as it was. People will wear masks, but they'll still go on a cruise. They'll still go and visit the Arctic and whatever you do on cruises, run around the Mediterranean or Asia. So that's sort of even activities that would involve people over 65, you know, that sort of feels like that's going to come back. Air travel. Now this, you know, here's a thing, because, you know, Greece, which is a very popular holiday destination, you know, is saying, well, the UK isn't in the right place before we can travel to Greece, as far as they're concerned. And you can't blame them. They've had a handful of deaths. You know, they don't want cough. They don't want, you know, the Brits spoiling things over there. So, you know, it's going to take a while before Britain is in a place where air travel, as it was, is going to resume. But for places who are in a similar situation, for example, Spain, you know, plenty of Brits would happily travel to Spain, and Spain would say, well, we're pretty much in the same bubble as the Brits. So that feels like air travel is going to be back on. And if people are wearing masks, you know, masks is my thing, why not? You know, if you're all sitting in your seats and you've got your masks on, and, you know, take it to the next level, you know, take it, never mind the surgical mask, if you have to sit with an N95 on for the duration of the flight, why not? You know, why not sit with a proper respirator mask? You know, that's all very doable. And the availability of masks, when you look now, you can go to Marks and Spencer's and you can buy a pack of 3 masks. Well, you know, when you think back to how it was in February, we were getting all that duff advice about don't buy masks, don't wear masks. And everyone was scratching their heads going, hey, wait, everyone in Asia is wearing masks. Why are we being told that this is, you know, a sensible thing to do? Well, we're way beyond that. You can go to Marks and Spencer's now and buy a pack of 3 masks. And that, interestingly, when you look at the countries that are now adopting this mask culture to deal with the virus, that, more than anything else with the social distancing, is now keeping the virus down. So that when you look at the prevalence of the virus in the population, London has something like 17 to 22% of people have been exposed to and have got antibodies to the virus. And when you think about that, that's a lot of people have had the virus and got over it. Or maybe didn't even know they had it, such as the sort of wide range of symptoms of the virus. You may have had symptoms that, you know, sort of you barely noticed, you didn't even know. I mean, only recently a number of symptoms have been added in the UK because, you know, people just didn't know that they had the virus, and yet they're now testing positive for the antibodies. So we know that the virus is very bad news if you're over 65, but if you're under 65, I'm not saying it's great and you don't want to get it, but the chances of dying of it are 1 in 333,333. So that doesn't sound so bad. And if I've got to wear a mask, like people in Asia do, as the price of being able to go out for a drink or meet with 4 or 5 people or take an aeroplane, well, why not? They do all these things in Asia with a mask. So sort of normality is sort of heading back our way. And, you know, are these masks expensive? No, they're not. 70p. You know, in theory, you should dispose of this mask every day. But if you're only wearing it to walk the streets for 4 or 5 minutes or to go shopping, in theory, you should get away with it. But if there's that little virus about, probably you'd get through one of these in a week. Now, actually, you can buy a box of 50 now from Boots for £30, and I think that's a good investment in your health. So you could actually wear one and dispose of it every day, you know, without any problems. The other thing I tend to talk about is gloves, you know. So on they go. We know that the virus is out there, and it's, you know, if we're saying that 5% of the population as a whole of the UK have been exposed to the virus and have got antibodies, then we know it's out there. And we know that there are so many infections a day, 2,000-3,000 infections a day. And it's going to find its way into places like Amazon and the post office. Of course it is. So gloves are very important. Of course, hand washing is important. And, you know, again, when you think back to February, it did seem strange, didn't it? You're right. Wash your hands and sing happy birthday, you know. Why not just put gloves on like they used to do? But now, you know, as I say, we're into this post-COVID world now, and all this sort of rather duff information is dropping away. And yes, washing hands has its place, but so does gloves, and so does masks. Now, I saw an article which I think probably, you know, accounted for 10,000 unnecessary deaths in the UK. And the article said that this surgical mask is equivalent to an N95 mask for the treatment of SARS patients. Now, you know, we know there's several hundred dead people who work for the NHS who, you know, I'm sorry, were living with that, and it's nonsense. You know, if you're anywhere near a SARS patient, you need a proper N95 respirator mask, which fits tightly around here to stop the virus getting in here. And that, of course, is one of the benefits of wearing a mask at all. You know, it's a big clunky coronavirus. The chances are you're going to pick it up in your hands. You know, if somebody's breathed it out and it's fallen on a surface, you're going to pick it up on your hands or from the post. And we know that we sort of touch our face a lot. So one of the advantages of a face mask is that you touch the mask, you don't touch your face, because no amount of washing is going to keep you safe. It helps. But if you've got the mask as well, you know, the data's in now, the evidence is there that that's going to work. And, you know, the classic international comparison is Hong Kong. 4 deaths, you know, 97% of the public wearing masks. And that's in a sort of epicenter, you know, of the early exposure to this. So the data's in, we know we need to wear masks, we know why, that besides anything else, it stops us touching our face, and that's why it's a good idea to dispose of it and just make that investment at Boots of a box of 50 for 30 quid, which, you know, it's not a huge investment in your health. So we've done masks, we've done gloves. As we sort of dive into this, we're sort of moving into the health and safety zone, because we want to be back in the workplace and we want our employees to be safe, our customers to be safe. So besides the masks and gloves and the temperature taking, which is absolutely vital at the entrance, there is the oximeter. And what this does, this just measures your blood oxygen levels. If you've got the virus, then one of the signs is low blood oxygen levels. There we are, 97%. I'm virus free. Easy as that. And what peace of mind's that, to know that you're virus free? Because as we go through the day, everyone's got funny little symptoms of this or that, or even a cold. And you know, there's reassurance. If the blood oxygen levels start falling, well, you know you've got to go to hospital, and don't hesitate. One of the huge impacts of the crisis has been people avoiding healthcare in hospitals. Now, in the States, this has created a serious financial crisis, because something like 17% of GDP in the States is tied to healthcare. So it's actually created, the virus has created, just by people staying away from healthcare, a recession. Now, how long that lasts in the healthcare sector, I don't know. But it's a very significant sector in the States. Even in the UK, some 10% of GDP is devoted to healthcare. Now, it's more of a state-run thing, a sort of mixture of public and private. So, you know, there's less immediate, you know, if the hospital goes quiet, you know, half the staff don't get laid off in the way that happens in the US. But even so, we need to see those utilization levels rise. And certainly if you've got shortness of breath and you really are struggling to breathe, then you need to take the ride to A&E. As you know, again, just to take some of the mystique out of it all, you know, when you go to hospital, the chances are that you'll just be given oxygen, 100% oxygen, and medication. And the chances are you won't be put on a ventilator. And if you are, well, the outcomes are pretty bad. We know that. So on goes the mask. £5 mask. £5 can of oxygen. And you just breathe normally. And as first aid, you know, if you're feeling a little under the weather, the chances are that will do the trick, or for the ride to A&E to get checked out properly. But you'll know if you need to go to A&E, such is the severity of this. Now, you know, the way we've done masks, and it's a bit of a shame, because in the course of the sort of, you know, 3 months, you know, people were, official advice was, and it's still, I mean, it's hilarious, isn't it? In the UK, it's tragic, it's not hilarious. Wear face coverings. So they didn't want to say they got this wrong. They're now saying you should wear a face covering, and, you know, like this. So everyone should look like they were riding a motorbike or something. Well, it's not so good, because I can feel my breath. I don't really feel as comfortable as if I'm wearing a mask, a proper surgical mask. You know, I mean, I might be able to ride a motorbike wearing this, but I'm not going to be able to work. That's nonsense. So, we'll see the end of that. That will happen, and gradually, people will just, go to Marks and Spencer's and Boots, get a proper surgical mask on, and away you go. This material, say we've still got sort of some duff information back from February. This material is called melt-blown non-woven. It's polypropylene. The UK is one of the leading manufacturers of this material. 6 tons makes 6 million masks a day, more than enough for everybody. So, there really isn't a problem. And time has gone on, and people have responded, and there are now lines going in making these masks in profusion, millions and millions of these masks. So you don't have to feel guilty that you're keeping this mask from a health professional. And believe me, if you're around a SARS patient, you should not be wearing this. You should be wearing an N95 mask. And, I think there's clarity on that now. So now we can sort of move on, talk about some of the financial things and the emergency assistance and how that's going. Obviously, one of the brighter features of the crisis has been the response of government. It's intriguing. We started out really like Sweden. We started out with this idea of, well, we can't stop it, certainly not in London. Let's let it do what it's going to do, because chances are it's not going to affect the under 65s anyway. Now, we didn't know that then. And we still don't really know about it. There's sort of funny little syndromes coming up in children. So it was a little brave. Some might say foolhardy to do this. But nonetheless, we sort of suddenly pivoted to the lockdown. That has run its course. But interestingly, when you look at the UK and Sweden, our sort of death rate, the impact on the over 65s, has now sort of pretty well the same. So, it does appear with this virus that although it's exacted a price and made us sort of change a lot of the things we do, it is time limited. It may even be self-limiting and may just simply disappear. And there's certainly huge work going out on into vaccine. So will the financial assistance go on forever? No, of course it won't. The furlough scheme has something like 6 million people on it. But there was the news yesterday that Rolls-Royce had made 9,000 redundancies. There comes a point in business where you just have to say, well, it depends on the orders. It's not a question of taking money from the government, keeping everyone going on furlough. That comes to an end. And there's a notice period anyway to run. So we're going to see this. I suspect we're not going to see people furloughing through to June. They're going to bite the bullet now, and they're going to say, yeah, that's it. We need to restructure now. So we are going to see unemployment shooting up. Now, fortunately, the universal credit, this is one of the bright spots of the crisis, in that the IT performance of government, that I can remember in the last 7 years has been, not startling. And yet in this crisis, obviously a lot of the building blocks are in place. And we actually have something that's pretty slick now. The logging in to HMRC online services seems, now that we've got used to it, pretty simple and pretty secure. The information seems to be there, the buttons seem to work, it all seems to happen. So, that is one of the bright spots. And universal credit in particular, if that's the route you go, and for most self-employed, that's the route I recommended at the start of this to everyone. Just get signed up for it, because it's going to take a while for the grant to come through anyway. That's been a bit of a lifesaver, because although banks have been prepared to reschedule loans, whether for vans or for houses, even so, it's you still need that money coming in, and it's £409 a month for someone over 25, and if you expand that to a family, 2 adults and a teenager or a young adult, that's a really hefty, it adds up to a pretty hefty package. So universal credit has been a success, and you just get a simple phone call. Are you working? No, no one's expecting you to be working in this, when they're asking you to stay at home. So, furlough, universal credit, the self-employed, that's happening now. We're being told, what the grant is. They've got the records, and that's being dispersed successfully. With universal credit, of course, that's sort of limited in terms of savings. So if you're a couple and you've both got £8,000 savings, that's the limit. So if you've got more savings than that, or you had substantial dividend income, in the previous year, the chances are, if that dividend income exceeds your self-employed income anyway, that you're not going to qualify for this, because this is obviously there for people that really need it. Loans. Now, sort of, I think we can put all the grants and so on, the premises grants are obviously happened very quickly and very welcome. But now we need to talk about loans. Now, the bounce back loan, in the course of this, we were saying that the loans aren't really working. It was bad enough trying to get a loan out of a bank last year. All the banks were pulling back. They were sort of socially distancing from their customers, particularly if you had anything to do with construction. Because, the banks weren't silly. They knew what was coming in the economic pipeline. Because that's what's happened. The first quarter has taken a hit, not just from the virus, but also we were at the end of a very long expansion. And the really good businesses, the sort of businesses that you should invest in the stock market, they were actually selling business units. Over the last 2 years, they were selling into this rising market. They weren't just waiting for something bad to happen. So that's quite a good sign of, which businesses were well managed. Businesses are actually in better shape when you go through the FTSE 100. The big employers are actually in better shape than you might think. And the big loans will help. But there is a very good chance that things are going to get back to some normality far sooner than people think. And yes, some things like gatherings of more than 6 or 10 people just look too risky while this is happening. But how relevant is that to working, to the workplace? Yes, if you're working in a meatpacking plant, the chances are you are going to have an encounter with the virus. And if we look at the American meatpacking plants, a plant of 2,000 people, it's the perfect environment for the virus. There's lots of steam about. the virus will go through that in a week. And, of the 2,000, 1,000 will get it. And, the 1,000 that get it, those with risk factors or who are over 65, 2, 3, 4 of those will die, even in a workplace, because death in a hospital or a care home, is not unexpected. And, a lot of people, when they take that ride to hospital, they're pretty philosophic about it. But you don't expect to die in the workplace. So, outside the workplace, no, the sort of gatherings of, a maximum 6. But again, as we move into this area of bubbles and people going, well, what's my bubble? I'm going to meet for a drink with my family, or I'm going to meet for a drink with a few friends. And people are going to develop sort of bubbles, if you like, encounters, in the same way that countries are. And as we were saying earlier, when you look at Spain and the UK, a similar experience with the virus. So, that is a bubble that sort of makes sense. Similarly with France, similarly with Germany, similarly with Scandinavia. There is a bubble there. And, in terms of what's gone on in the States, well, again, there's worse bubbles to be in than the USA, the UK, and the EU. So, from the viewpoint of our economy and so on, there's every reason to be sort of optimistic that we're sort of going to come out of this pretty well. Now, the bounce back loans, in the course of this, we were saying, we need something much simpler for small business. And the Chancellor responded with the bounce back loans. And a lot of people are reporting very good experiences with that. Personally, I'm still seeing it being pretty glitchy. It varies from bank to bank. And if you encounter, really ideally, you need your business bank that's already banking you to come up with this bounce back loan. So, you are going to have to push it if it doesn't simply turn up in the post in response to your online application. A lot of people are reporting good things with it. But, from what I'm seeing, it's not universal. And you need to push. And as we'd said before, in this sort of COVID era, you don't sit on the phone for hours. Use the contact forms, whether it be the local authority, government, or the bank. Use the contact forms and the chat to communicate. That's the way we're going to do it now. So we've had a chat about the sort of background and where we are in the public health domain. We've sort of had a chat about health and safety and what we can do in our own domains in the workplace. We've had a chat about the financial assistance. So this is the bit, I'll just do a little bit on communication now, because, there's almost a bewildering array of ways you can communicate now. But something that I came across today, which actually looks quite promising, is Facebook Rooms. Now, I didn't know Facebook did anything like this, but that's well worth a look, because it seemed to me it worked pretty seamlessly. And Zoom, which we use, and TeamViewer, they're great. But this Facebook Rooms, for conversations with customers, staff, and all the rest of it, seemed to me worked pretty well. So, I just sort of flagged that one up. And, one thing we can say is that people are not communicating less. They're finding different ways to communicate. And, when it comes to international business and culture, there's every reason to think, no, people, will do what Asian people have done, and they will live with this. They'll adjust their behaviour, particularly while there's an actual epidemic where there's an outbreak on. But then things will sort of go back to normal. And, we can expect, although we might have these bubbles, because obviously some people have coped with this better. And, it's hard to see now why the Chinese would just let everyone from the EU into China without a period of quarantine. So that's quite tricky. That's not easy. Because they just have so few cases and they just don't want this. They don't want it at all. They haven't taken the Western approach. And, there may be very good reason for this. The indications of this in China was that a much higher fatality rate over there than we have here. I mean, we have our colds and flus here, we all have pretty good immune systems, and we are all quite social. We're getting out and about catching colds, and our sort of immune system is pretty active. Not really the same in sort of China, where things are more nuanced and people are more socially distanced. So I mean, whether we're not going to be in the same bubble with China, but as I've said, the bubble of the US, the UK, and the EU is a pretty good bubble to be in from the business perspective. So I'm pretty sort of optimistic, and we are emerging from lockdown. I sort of call it locksit. It's a sort of process of, it's going to be more painful than probably it needs to be. And, there'll be sort of lots of shouting and arm twisting about whether schools should open and all the rest of it. But one way or another, we're going to get through to August. I mean, on that, it's half term. There's 4 weeks left of the term. I'd have been tempted to say, come on, let's resume in September. But there is going to be this process of pushing people back to schools and back to work before September, and it needs to, because things do need to get moving again, and people, they need the kids in school so they can work, but more particularly so the grandparents don't have to look after the kids, because that's what we don't want. We want to protect the over 65s until we get to the other end of this, which we will. So that's LOCSIT. We've done communication, we've done the grant assistance. So we're sort of coming on to the outlook now and markets. So what have markets been doing? I mean, markets pretty well been going sideways. You had that sort of epic fall in the States. I mean, basically what happened was the CDC, before they were muzzled, announced that schools should have plans in place to close, and the markets took fright. They just went, the markets have been told, had sort of really lulled themselves into a false sense of security, and went to the opposite extreme, and we had this sort of woof market meltdown, and then we had really quite an extraordinary realignment. We sort of hit that bottom, and then sophisticated investors were going into were selling their shares, everything, and buying what are called the FANG stocks and similar stocks to that, sort of technology stocks, Facebook, Apple, Google, Netflix, things that would do well out of the lockdown, if you like. And we had this extraordinary rise in the market, almost to the extent of another bull market. Now, I looked at that as a sort of rather staid, conservative investor, and I said, do I really want to buy these stocks? I think a lot of people who really, really like these stocks just saw this as a huge buying opportunity. But, I look at it and I go, so where are the dividends? Do I really want to buy something that's trading on a multiple of 30, 40 times earnings? What could possibly go wrong? I'm not that sort of trader investor. I like to have a portfolio that yields, old-fashioned things like dividends and has old-fashioned things like dividend cover. So, I'm buying relatively cheaply when it comes to price earnings multiples. So for me, I wasn't involved in that at all. I didn't sort of look at that. And what I did, which you may find interesting, is that I was fortunate in that I was 100% cash. I'd seen the market going up and up and up and up, and I was out of cash. As I say, the people I admire are the people who, towards the end of long expansion, are moving into cash, and I was 100% in cash. I'd sold several business interests, more by luck than good fortune, but in a way that's the sign of the end of a long expansion, is when you have buyers coming free for business interests. I took those opportunities to go into cash. So now here am I sitting in cash, which is a nice place to be. But how am I going to invest? Here am I'm this, rather stodgy investor. I could give it to a stockbroker, but my little pile isn't enough to attract a really good broker to manage it. You need about $500,000 to do that. So here am I, sort of sitting in cash, and wondering what to do. And what I'd done, I'd sort of spotted shares that had a very high yield. For example, at one stage, British American Tobacco had a yield of 10%. 10% for a stock. That's incredible. It's almost obscene. So that was a share that was on my list. And as the market went down, I built up this list of these stocks, all FTSE 100, all big capitalization. I'm not interested in little companies. Let other people do that. Which had a sort of dividend yield of 8, 9, 10%, and yet were really good companies. So I had my list of about 30 stocks in that category. And, I've bought some of those shares. And we'll just see what happens, because it seemed to me that after we'd had the sort of big fall and then the big rise, then the market started going sideways. And, if we're trying to forecast what's going to go on, the market's a very sensitive indicator. Admittedly, as I say, the market's got sort of caught by the CDC announcement, and then, down they went. But the markets are factoring in all this information, and it seems to me the markets are going sideways. That means they're either going to go up, and we're going to see the Dow at 35,000 in a sort of wave of American enthusiasm and trillions of dollars of printed money. What's that about? The mysteries of economics. Surely there's a price to pay for doing that. But, there doesn't seem to be. You can say that. So who knows what's going to happen? The Dow could pile on up on this sort of wave of helicopter money, or it could fall. And as wise hands say, the Dow is perfectly capable of falling 20% in a day in this market. So of the money that I've put in so far, that's about 25% of the cash that I have on hand. And I'm keeping 25% for the next big movement, one way or the other. I want to now see the market move either up 10% or down 10%, before I make another investment. Or if we get, another 3 months of going sideways, I'll probably put in another tranche of that money. And that seems to me a sensible way of going on, because post-COVID, although there is all this helicopter money about, money is very precious. A lot of people are going to be out of work. Something like 36 million jobless claims in the US now. And the ability to make money from wise investing has probably never been greater. And in part, I think that's what's sort of buoying up the market, that you have something like 800,000 people opening up accounts and starting to invest in the market, because that's their way of making some money. And they'll do it in the ways that they know. Some people will be familiar with trading, some people will swear by Bitcoin and gold and so on, or they'll be experienced as currency traders. And there'll be sort of rather old-fashioned sort of hands like me who are looking for shares that I can buy now for 40% of what they were 3 months ago, and which I know that in 2 years' time, there's a very good chance those shares are going to be yielding me 10% by way of dividends, which is, hooray for that. So there's a word on markets, and I hope that's helpful. And we pretty well covered it. So just have a look for some more of your comments. As we say, I love that comment that was, like 1 in 333,333. Yeah. It was great. Yeah, that cheered me up. Science, what do we think about scientists now? I mean, they haven't exactly had a great pandemic, have they? They told us not to wear face masks. What was that about? It seems to me that the scientists were really following the politicians, that at the end of the day, they're the people who pay them, and that the public have been best served by just following the evidence of our own eyes and looking at Asia and what Asia's done. So I think science and politicians, yeah, when they come along and say, we've got this great model that predicts what's going to happen, and we're formulating policy on the basis of this model, we'll just whistle, to be honest, whether it's in the economic sphere or the public health sphere, and we'll just use the evidence of our own eyes. I did see a great video of a doctor, a Chinese doctor, sort of talking about the virus. So if you've got any doubt, that's worth having a look on Twitter and having a look at that video on my feed, because that really was good. I really felt that that helped sort of shrug off some of the disinformation. God, you're quite a humorous lot, aren't you, Cindy? Well, it gives me a giggle anyway. Um, Obviously, the conversation's changing, which actually, in a way, is a good thing. If we just go back to normal and start talking about racism or immigration, in a way, that's probably a good sign, that we're not all in panic about the virus. But it is a pretty shocking story. And the sort of, as the year goes on and Brexit unfolds, we'll see this inability to get on with our neighbours in Europe that, politicians have. That's going to get confronted with reality, just as in the public health arena. And, we've now got this little pretty organised invasion coming over from France, and we've got Mr. Farage who's appeared from nowhere and popped up and said, look at this, quite rightly. I mean, it's incredible. Young men of military age coming from countries where ISIS is strong. What could possibly go wrong? And if, politicians find 100 of those young men charging armed into Parliament, it's not good. And if you think I'm being alarmist there, I mean, look at Syria, look at Libya, the ongoing problems in Libya. This policy that we have at the moment of just waving everyone through, a bit like we did the virus, and hope that nothing too bad is going to happen. Well, I don't know. It's back to normal, after the crisis. And again, just looking at how we're going to deal with that. We did. Yeah, it's really good to see the progress on masks, isn't it? I mean, there was a great graph which actually showed the progress on mask wearing in the population in America and the progress of the deaths going down. And, the more people wore masks, all the other interventions were there, the early interventions, social distancing, lockdown and so on, and still the deaths were going up. But then you've got this sort of coming to the rescue in the graph, the sort of mask wearing as a percentage of the population, and, the tide turning as it did around Easter time when it peaked. Well, it's great news. I mean, London, it's great. I mean, London, absolutely no reason why things shouldn't just get back to normal. And of course, the politicians do have to get out of the way and let people wear proper surgical masks, as we've said pretty well every night for many, many months. Well, I think that's covered this week's comments. And I won't get into some of the politics because I think we're all ready for a bit of a break from that, aren't we? But it's good to see Parliament back up and running, and being frank, a leader of the opposition who is a little bit more like a leader of the opposition. Sort of Jeremy Corbyn was his own man, and just saw things through his fairly narrow lens, which was why the country rejected him. But for Parliament to work, there has to be a dialogue, and hopefully in the PM, now he's back to work and with his mind firmly on the job, one hopes. you know, we're going to see that happen, and things that are wrong are going to be put right. And that's what happens when people have dialogue. So that's great. Many thanks. Nice to see you all, and see you again next time. Stay safe. Bye for now.